There are moments in music history when the ground doesn't just shift, it cracks open. And for years, the industry moved under a kind of quiet order, an invisible map that everyone followed even if they never admitted it out loud. At the very top of that map sat Beyoncé and Jay-Z, not just as artists, but as a full-blown dynasty. Their names carried weight, their silence carried power, and their influence stretched so far behind the scenes that most people never even realized how many doors they controlled. But every empire eventually hears a sound it can't ignore. A sound that isn't polite, predictable, or willing to play along. This time, that sound came from Nicki Minaj. Not whispered, not hinted, not softened. It came sharp, loud, and impossible to brush off. It was the kind of moment that made the entire industry inhale at the same time, because everyone could feel it. Something old was cracking, and something new was rising. For more than a decade, the Carter dynasty stood untouched. Their image flawless, their brand impenetrable, their status above the chaos that swirled around everyone else. People could talk, speculate, or gossip, but nobody truly challenged them. Not publicly, not directly, not with the kind of fire that could burn its way through the walls they built. Until now. Nicki wasn't throwing shade, she wasn't sending subliminals, she wasn't playing the coded game that celebrities use to pretend everything is fine. She was stepping straight into the center of the room and lighting a match. And the moment she did, the entire atmosphere changed. Suddenly, the quiet rules the industry lived by didn't feel so permanent. The hierarchy didn't feel so sealed. The dynasty didn't feel so untouchable. Because if one person was bold enough to challenge the crown, who else might be waiting to speak up? This was no small disagreement, no petty celebrity moment. This was a shift in power, one loud enough to rattle the walls of an empire that had never been questioned so openly. And the craziest part? This was only the beginning. Long before Nicki ever fired a shot, there was already an invisible system shaping everything behind the scenes. The music industry doesn't run on talent alone, no matter how much fans love to believe it does. It runs on alliances, unspoken agreements, and silent arrangements that never make it into interviews. And at the top of all those invisible threads sat the Carters. For years, Beyoncé and Jay-Z weren't just performers. They were the North Star every executive followed. If they nodded, careers moved forward. If they stayed silent, opportunities mysteriously dried up. Their approval became a kind of currency, the kind artists didn't talk about publicly, but definitely felt privately. Everyone knew the rules. Stay respectful, stay aligned, don't question the narrative, and don't step outside the lines drawn by the most influential couple in the business. That's where the idea of the golden cage began. To the outside world, it looked like luxury, endless blessings, and a pathway to superstardom. But behind the curtain, it was something else entirely. It was a system built on balance, order, and obedience. You could rise, yes, you could shine. You could get the big performances, the magazine covers, the elite cosigns. But only if you played the game exactly the way it was laid out. And the moment someone even thought about bending those rules, the pressure came fast. Maybe a call didn't get returned. Maybe a collaboration fell through. Maybe a spotlight shifted to someone safer. Nothing loud, nothing messy. Just a quiet shift in energy that let everyone know they were stepping too close to a line that wasn't meant to be crossed. Artists whispered about this dynamic privately, careful not to let those words reach the wrong ears. Executives talked in coded language, hinting at relationships to protect or brands to maintain. And all of it pointed back to the same center. An empire that controlled access in ways most people never fully understood. That silence is what made the Carters so powerful. They never needed public statements. They never needed messy back and forths. Their influence was built on quiet moves, private conversations, and a reputation so strong that people adjusted themselves before the Carters ever had to say a word. But quiet power only works when everyone agrees to stay quiet. And somewhere along the way, someone decided they weren't playing by those rules anymore. Because while the industry stayed polite, Nicki Minaj was watching. She saw the patterns, the favoritism, the unspoken alliances. And whether people loved her or hated her, she was the one artist bold enough to say out loud what others only whispered. The system wasn't ready for someone who refused to whisper. And that's when the cracks began to show. Nicki Minaj has never been the type to tiptoe. She doesn't sugarcoat, she doesn't hint, and she definitely doesn't play the quiet game that keeps so many artists in check. So when she finally decided to aim her voice at the most powerful couple in music, it didn't come wrapped in a long explanation or a carefully worded statement. It came in the form of a single word, one that looked harmless to anyone outside the culture, but landed like a punch for the people who knew exactly what she was doing. Camel. Just 6 letters. No hashtags, no tagging, no drama on the surface. But online, especially in the corners of hip-hop where everything has a deeper meaning, fans understood instantly. They knew that nickname had history. For years, internet circles used it as a coded jab aimed at Jay-Z, a mix of mockery, criticism, and rebellion against someone seen as untouchable. It wasn't just an insult, it was a symbol, one tied to accusations of ego, control, and power, plays that people whispered about but rarely confronted head-on. With one tweet, Nicki wasn't just throwing shade. She was kicking down a door everyone else pretended didn't exist. It hit fast. It hit hard. And it sent the online world spinning in seconds. People started digging, theorizing, connecting Nicki's post to years of industry tension. Some said she was finally saying what others were too afraid to express. Some wondered if it was a warning shot, a test, or a challenge. But no matter how you interpreted it, one thing was obvious. This wasn't a random emoji moment. It was a calculated spark aimed right at the heart of an empire known for staying above the chaos. And Nicki didn't just stop with the tweet. She followed it with a wave of pointed comments, bold claims, and sharp accusations. Statements that painted Jay-Z as more than just a businessman. She framed him as a man pulling strings behind the scenes, someone who allegedly decided who rose, who stalled, and who quietly disappeared from the spotlight. Fans watched as she peeled back layers people usually tiptoe around, calling out the influence she felt he held over decisions that shaped careers. And the craziest part? She did it without fear. No hesitation, no backtracking. This wasn't a subtweet. This wasn't passive aggression. This was Nicki Minaj stepping fully into the center of a storm and daring the sky to break. Because for her, the camel tweet wasn't a joke. It was a signal. A message that she wasn't intimidated by the dynasty the industry had protected for so long. A promise that if nobody else was willing to challenge the throne, she'd do it herself. Loudly, openly, and without apology. And the moment that message went out, the entire industry felt the shift. Because once Nicki fired that first shot, there was no going back. And what came next made the tweet look small in comparison. Once the camel tweet cracked open the door, Nicki didn't hesitate. She walked straight through it and dragged the entire conversation into places most artists would never dare touch. Because if the first strike was symbolic, the second was explosive. She went after something much bigger than a nickname or a subtle jab. She challenged the influence Jay-Z allegedly has over some of the biggest platforms in the world, especially one of the most coveted stages any artist can ever dream of, the Super Bowl. Nicki claimed that Lil Wayne, one of the most respected names in hip-hop history, wasn't kept from the halftime show because of numbers, talent, or relevance. According to her, it happened because of old grudges, personal history that fans barely knew anything about. And that accusation didn't just poke at Jay-Z's reputation, it went straight for the foundation of everything he built. Because through Roc Nation, Jay-Z plays a major advisory role with the NFL. He's tied to the very committee that discusses artists, branding, image, and halftime selections. That's not a rumor, that's public knowledge. And when Nicki suggested he use that influence to decide who gets the biggest stage in America, it hit the industry like a lightning bolt. People didn't know if she was right. They didn't know if she was exaggerating. But they knew one thing. Nobody had ever said it out loud before. Suddenly, fans started digging. They remembered Lil Wayne saying that being overlooked for the halftime show hurt. They remembered the years where the NFL seemed to pick safer, more polished artists over legends people actually wanted to see. And while no one could prove Nicki's claim, the timing made her words impossible to ignore. Because if Jay-Z did shape those decisions, even indirectly, it meant he wasn't just a music icon. He was a gatekeeper to the biggest performance slot on the planet. A slot that can revive careers, redefine legacies, and solidify cultural impact in minutes. And Nicki wasn't finished. She didn't frame her accusation as petty drama or jealousy. She presented it as a pattern, one where certain artists mysteriously thrived while others quietly hit a ceiling. A pattern that, in her view, pointed back to Jay-Z's personal alliances and personal grudges. She talked about him like a man who didn't just move pieces on a board, but decided who even got to play. Fans started connecting their own dots, too. They pointed out artists who seemed to get endless opportunities, ones who always appeared at the right shows, had the right backing, or could do no wrong in the industry's eyes. And then there were artists who suddenly fell off, not because their music changed, but because the momentum around them vanished overnight. Nicki was tapping into something people already suspected, but never had the nerve to say publicly. If the Carters approved you, your path was smooth. If they didn't? Well, things got complicated. Whether those suspicions were true or not didn't even matter at that point. Nicki had exposed the conversation. She ripped open a curtain people had tiptoed around for years. And instead of backing down when the backlash started, she doubled down. She questioned Jay-Z's character, his motives, the way he allegedly used relationships, loyalty, and industry leverage. She wasn't criticizing a businessman. She was challenging a system. And the impact was immediate. Suddenly, the music world felt different. Executives went quiet. Artists treaded carefully. Fans argued non-stop. And for the first time in a long time, the Carter dynasty didn't look impenetrable. Because when Nicki accused Jay-Z of using his NFL influence to settle personal scores, it wasn't just an allegation. It was a direct strike at the empire's strongest pillar, the belief that their power was earned, clean, and untouchable. And that single strike made everyone ask the same question. If this was true, what else had been happening behind the scenes? And that question is exactly what pushed everything into even darker territory next. By the time Nicki called out Jay-Z's influence, the internet was already buzzing. But things took a completely different turn when she stepped into territory that most celebrities avoid like a trap. She didn't accuse Beyoncé or Jay-Z of anything directly. Instead, she pointed at the internet itself, the wild fan theories, the unverified gossip, and the deep web conspiracies that have followed the Carters for years. And the moment she did, old rumors that had been collecting dust suddenly came roaring back into the spotlight. Nicki highlighted the way people online twist stories, build narratives, and drag the Carter family into conversations they never asked to be part of. She wasn't endorsing the claims. She wasn't acting like they were facts. She was showing how easily the internet takes a single detail, wraps it in speculation, and turns it into a trending topic. And once that kind of rumor spreads, it becomes its own creature, fed by fan imagination, amplified by curious bystanders, and immortalized in threads that never truly disappear. One of the wildest examples, the long-running online conspiracy theories claiming Beyoncé was involved in things far outside the realm of normal celebrity gossip. These stories have circulated in internet subcultures for years. Not confirmed, not supported by evidence, just rumors that keep resurfacing in the digital underground. Nicki referenced how some people online insist on believing these narratives no matter how many times they're dismissed. And when she acknowledged that these rumors exist, even without validating them, it was enough to make the internet erupt again. Comment sections lit up with old screenshots. Podcasts resurrected decade-old stories. Twitter threads got millions of impressions overnight. Suddenly, the fringe ideas people used to laugh off were being debated again, not because they were taken seriously, but because Nicki had dragged them back into the public eye. And that's where things got messy. Because the Carters' silence, which usually works so well, started to feel different this time. Heavier, almost fragile. Their strategy has always been simple. Don't respond, don't react, don't feed the flames. But in an era where social media controls the narrative, silence can sometimes create more noise than words. Nicki's comments pushed the conversation into a strange crossroads. Fans who loved the Carters defended them instantly. Fans who felt overshadowed or unheard suddenly had a reason to speak up. And the middle group, the ones who never cared about rumors before, were now reading threads they never would have clicked on. That's the danger of online mythology. Once a rumor becomes part of internet culture, it never fully dies. It just waits for a spark. And Nicki became that spark. She wasn't validating the conspiracies. She wasn't saying they were real. She was exposing the way celebrity culture, power, and speculation blend together in a digital world where truth and rumor often look identical. And because the Carters are surrounded by mystique, their silence made the speculation feel even louder. But then something happened that nobody expected. As the internet spiraled, other voices from the past, voices with history, started stepping into the conversation. And that's when everything shifted again. Once the internet began tearing open old archives, something even more unexpected happened. People who had been silent for years suddenly began to speak. Not in explosive exposés or tell-all interviews, but in subtle likes, cryptic tweets, resurfaced comments, and short clips that fans hadn't seen in ages. It was like the industry had been holding its breath for a decade. And Nicki's words finally made some people exhale. And that's when everything started to shift. Because the Carters are surrounded by more than just fame. They're surrounded by history. Decades of collaborators, rivals, producers, dancers, executives, and artists who've passed through their orbit. And when the tension hit its peak, the internet started noticing that some of these old connections no longer acted as silent, loyal satellites. A few producers liked tweets shading Jay-Z. A former collaborator reposted a clip criticizing Roc Nation's behind-the-scenes power games. A stylist from Beyoncé's early era commented, "Y'all don't even know the half." Nothing direct, nothing explicit, but enough to shift the energy. And in the digital age, subtlety speaks louder than a press conference. Suddenly, "Is Nicki lying?" became, "Why are so many people quietly co-signing this?" Fans dug up clips from early 2010s rappers who hinted at powerful people blocking opportunities. Footage of artists discussing the unspoken hierarchy of the industry. Producers talking about songs mysteriously disappearing due to political reasons. None of it named Jay-Z. None of it made direct accusations. But now, in context of Nicki's claims, these old interviews started looking different. A few names who used to be tightly connected to Jay-Z's business machine seemed to step out of the shadows. They didn't accuse him of anything, but they didn't dismiss Nicki either. Some said things like, "There's a lot I could say, but I won't. People only show you what they want you to see." The industry has levels most fans will never understand. It wasn't what they said. It was how they said it. Carefully, deliberately, as if they were confirming the existence of a system without wanting to set it on fire. One or two statements could be dismissed. 10 could be written off as coincidence. But a wave of subtle movements, all happening after Nicki's comments? That's when fans started questioning whether the industry had been holding itself together with silence. It wasn't that people suddenly hated the Carters. It wasn't that anyone wanted to expose them. It was that Nicki had opened a door, and not everyone wanted it to close again. For years, people believed the Carters' world was airtight, linear, controlled, untouchable. Anyone who drifted away remained silent, as if bound by invisible loyalty. But this moment cracked that illusion, not with allegations, not with accusations, but with tiny breaks in the facade, micro gestures of truth that only make sense when placed together. And the biggest realization? If this many people were willing to hint at cracks in the empire, imagine what the people still staying silent are keeping to themselves. The stage was set, the air was tense, and with old connections stirring, the story was no longer just Nicki versus the Carters. It was the beginning of a larger unraveling, one that forced everyone to confront a question the industry tried to bury. If the strongest voices in the room are quiet, What are they protecting? What made Nicki's words hit so hard wasn't just what she said, it was who she was saying it about, and the system she was pointing to. Because beneath the surface of glamorous award shows, perfect branding, and curated friendships, the industry runs on something far more calculated. A hierarchy built on gatekeeping, loyalty, and influence that stretches into places fans never get to see. Nicki wasn't just calling out a person. She was calling out an entire structure, one that she felt had quietly dictated careers, controlled narratives, and shaped who gets to win long before the public ever thinks they're choosing. At the very top were the names everyone knew: the Carters, the executives, the cultural power brokers who could change someone's trajectory with a nod or a phone call. Below them were the affiliates, managers, major producers, PR teams, media insiders, people whose careers benefited from staying aligned with the dominant players. Under that came artists who were chosen, the ones who got the sync placements, the magazine covers, the surprise Grammy appearances, the early access to the best beats. Not because they were the only ones with talent, but because they were the safest bets for the structure. And finally, there were the wild cards, the ones who didn't bend easily, didn't follow the PR scripts, didn't fit into the polished image the industry liked to protect. These artists often had to fight twice as hard for half the recognition. Nicki always knew where she stood, and she never forgot how the game was played. According to fans and commentators, Nicki's frustration didn't come out of thin air. Rumors suggest she witnessed moments that made the industry's power dynamic feel less like strategy and more like manipulation. People being elevated or sidelined based on who they aligned with. Songs getting held back because they threatened someone else's shine. Media narratives shifting almost overnight whenever the wrong person felt crossed. To the public, it all looked coincidental. To someone inside the machine, it looked coordinated. Nicki's message, whether people loved it or hated it, was pretty clear. There was a power around Jay-Z that felt too big, too quiet, and too influential for comfort. Nicki wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for autonomy, something many artists lose once they hit a certain level of success. She wanted to expose how alliances determine who becomes the face of a generation, how certain media platforms push narratives that benefit the same few people, how artists can be frozen out for refusing to play along, and how a chosen inner circle holds the keys to superstardom. To Nicki, this wasn't paranoia, it was survival. And the more she spoke, the more her fans connected the dots, realizing she wasn't describing a personal feud, she was describing a system. Nicki wasn't afraid to say the quiet part out loud. She suggested that too many conversations happen behind closed doors, too many decisions are made by the same small group, and too many artists are pressured into being grateful instead of independent. And because her voice was so big and her fan base even bigger, her words had the potential to disrupt the entire structure, not tear it down, but reveal how it worked. And that's what shook the empire more than any diss track ever could. Suddenly, people weren't just asking if Nicki was right or wrong, they were asking who else had seen the same thing, who else felt controlled, who else kept quiet out of fear, who else lost opportunities because they didn't play the game. Nicki's exposure wasn't a single event. It was a spotlight on a shadowy system that had been running smoothly for years. And by shining that light, she made sure one thing could never happen again. The silence that protected the power structure was never going to be quiet again. What started as a single spark from Nicki Minaj quickly turned into something much bigger, something the industry wasn't prepared for. Because once Nicki pushed back against the quiet hierarchy, other artists, creators, and insiders began reevaluating their own experiences. It was like someone had finally turned on the lights in a room everyone pretended was dark. And suddenly, people weren't afraid to look around. Nicki's decision to speak wasn't just controversial, it was contagious. Artists who had spent years feeling overshadowed, boxed in, or subtly controlled started to find their own voices. They didn't need to name names. They didn't need dramatic statements. All they had to do was tell their stories. A few R&B singers hinted that their album rollouts were rerouted to make space for bigger artists. A rising rapper implied that his features kept getting pulled at the last minute for political reasons. A songwriter posted a now-deleted message saying, "Y'all don't know how many careers were redirected to keep certain brands on top." None of it directly accused the Carters, but each piece added to a growing picture of a system built on quiet control and quiet consequences. The moment fans sensed a shift, the narrative exploded. Threads broke down timelines. TikTok commentators started connecting patterns in chart placements, award nominations, and media coverage. People began asking why certain artists always seemed protected while others mysteriously hit roadblocks. And while most of it was speculation, rumors, and theories, the tone was unmistakable. The untouchable image of the empire was cracking. The rebellion wasn't loud, it was persistent. Small voices adding up, clues, hints, stories, whispers, one after another, building momentum. This was the part nobody expected. Retired PR reps, old tour staff, assistants from the early 2000s, producers who left the game years ago. They weren't dragging anyone, but they started confirming what fans suspected. Things like, there were definitely favored creatives. Some artists were protected at all costs. There's always been a hierarchy. Nicki isn't imagining anything. These weren't accusations. They were acknowledgments of a system everyone knew existed, but never discussed publicly. And the more people spoke, the more it became clear. Nicki didn't break the system. She just revealed it. Even among fans, the energy changed. The automatic loyalty to the industry's powerhouses didn't feel as strong. People started questioning narratives they used to accept without hesitation. The conversation wasn't about choosing sides, it was about understanding the machinery behind the music they loved. That's what scared the structure the most. Not outrage, not drama, not rumors, awareness. Because once the audience starts questioning things, the magic trick doesn't work the same way. Nicki may have lit the match, but the fire spread because so many people recognized the heat. What she said tapped into years of pressure, silence, and frustration. Experiences countless artists had lived through, but never dared to say aloud. In a way, Nicki didn't just start a rebellion. She gave it a voice, and suddenly it wasn't about one woman versus one empire anymore. It became a conversation about control, freedom, and who gets to tell their story in an industry where the loudest microphone isn't always in the artist's hands. The rebellion wasn't organized. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even aggressive. It was simply the truth unfolding piece by piece. And while the Carters remained silent, the world around them suddenly wasn't. Because once people begin questioning power, the next step is inevitable. They start asking who should have it. By the time the conversation reached its peak, it wasn't just about allegations, rumors, or past drama anymore. It was about strategy, perception, and the stark contrast between two approaches to power. On one side, you had the Carters, masters of control, precision, and silence. On the other, Nicki Minaj, raw, unpredictable, fiery, and relentless. The Carters' strength has always been their image. Every move, every public statement, every appearance has been carefully calculated. Silence isn't weakness, it's a weapon. Their calm, composed demeanor sends a message. Everything is under control, nothing escapes their grasp. Years of perfect branding have trained fans and industry insiders alike to read between the lines. And in those lines, the Carters' dominance is unmistakable. A single comment can shift narratives, a subtle nod can redirect attention, and in moments where the chaos of the internet seems overwhelming, they remain untouchable, silent, unshaken, untouchable. Nicki, by contrast, thrives in the chaos. Her approach is emotional, direct, and unapologetically loud. She doesn't wait for the perfect moment. She creates it. She challenges, she provokes, she throws everything into the open and dares the world to respond. Every tweet, every statement, every clip carries her energy, her frustration, her refusal to be contained. And while the Carters wield silence like armor, Nicki uses disruption as a sword. This clash between silence and chaos created a spectacle unlike anything the industry had seen in years. On one hand, the Carters' silence amplified their control, leaving gaps in the narrative for speculation to grow. On the other, Nicki's loud rebellion filled those gaps with raw stories, unfiltered accusations, and an energy that pulled the public in, whether they loved her or not. The tension became almost tangible. Fans and industry insiders alike watched, fascinated, as the dance unfolded. Calm precision against unstoppable fire. Every online post, every cryptic comment, every hint of past drama was now part of a larger story about power and influence. It wasn't just celebrity gossip anymore. It was a lesson in how control operates in a world built on perception. And perhaps the most revealing part? It wasn't just the public who felt the weight of this clash. Artists, collaborators, and insiders, all those who had long navigated the golden cage, started to realize the stakes weren't just about loyalty or silence. They were about survival, opportunity, and truth. Who speaks? Who stays quiet? Who thrives? Who fades? All of it became part of a high-stakes game that had been unfolding quietly for years. Nicki's chaos didn't just challenge the Carters, it exposed the rules of the game itself. And in doing so, it forced everyone to confront a question they had long ignored. In a world where silence can be a weapon and chaos can be power, who really holds control? Because for every perfectly orchestrated move the Carters make, Nicki reminds the world that sometimes the loudest, most unpredictable voice is the one that shifts the balance. And with that, the empire, once untouchable, was no longer untouchable at all. So, what does all of this mean? Nicki Minaj didn't just start a feud, she disrupted an entire system, exposed patterns, and challenged a dynasty that has long seemed untouchable. For years, the Carters built an empire that thrived on precision, influence, and silence. Every move was calculated, every reaction measured, every image curated. And for the most part, it worked, until someone refused to follow the rules. Nicki's approach was the opposite of controlled. She was loud, unpredictable, and fearless. She spoke about gatekeeping, favoritism, and the unspoken power structures that shape careers. She highlighted rumors, resurfaced narratives, and indirectly pointed out the consequences of crossing the Carters' empire. And in doing so, she forced the industry and the public to confront what many suspected but few dared to say. But was this a victory? Or a reckless move? That's the question everyone is still debating. On one hand, Nicki showed that the untouchable can be challenged, that silence isn't invincible, and that power can be questioned. On the other, she stepped into a world where alliances, influence, and legacy are carefully guarded, and the fallout is unpredictable. One thing is clear: she changed the conversation. The quiet rules of the industry, once invisible and unspoken, are now on full display. Fans, artists, and insiders are watching more closely, connecting the dots, and questioning narratives that previously went unquestioned. And that ripple effect might be bigger than any single tweet, statement, or accusation. Ultimately, Nicki didn't just speak up for herself, she spoke for a larger truth: the reality that fame, talent, and opportunity are often mediated by power structures, loyalty, and invisible hierarchies. She reminded the world that even the most polished, untouchable dynasties have cracks, and that when someone refuses to stay quiet, those cracks can widen faster than anyone expects. So, did Nicki just challenge the untouchable? Or did she step into a fight she might never fully control? The answer is still unfolding. What we do know is this: the music industry will never look the same again, and the silence that once protected empires has been broken. The question now is for everyone watching: what happens next? And that's a story the world is still waiting to see.